The opulent silence of the Finch mansion was a currency all its own, purchased and maintained at great cost, and it was a silence that Alastair Finch wore like one of his custom-tailored suits. It was a testament to his success, a void where the noise of the common world dared not intrude. In this vast, marble-floored temple to wealth, the only sounds were the deliberate hushed ones he permitted, the soft tick of a grandfather clock worth more than a car, the gentle hum of the climate control system, the whisper of his own silk dressing gown as he moved from his bedroom to his office. He was the god in this machine, the central intelligence around which all things orbited. And like any deity, he had his acolytes, his lesser beings who existed to maintain his realm. The most frequent among them was a woman named Grace Omondi. To Alastair, Grace was not so much a person as a function. She was a silent, efficient appliance that tidied his life. She was the hand that made his bed with military precision, the presence that caused his discarded breakfast plate to vanish from his desk and reappear, sparkling, in the cupboard. He knew her name only because it was on her payroll file. He addressed her rarely, and when he did, it was never to ask, always to command. More coffee. This glass is smudged. The study needs dusting. Her responses were a language of quiet submission. A soft "Yes, Mr. Finch," a nod, the swish of her cleaning cloth against mahogany. On this particular afternoon, the sacred silence was broken. Alastair was embroiled in a high-stakes video conference, his voice booming with a false, performative bonhomie as he addressed the faces on his large monitor. The projections are solid, gentlemen. Rock solid. This merger isn't just a good idea, it's an inevitability. He laughed, a sharp, barking sound that didn't touch his eyes. It was then he noticed his coffee cup was empty. A frown creased his brow. An inconvenience. A flaw in the perfect machinery of his morning. He didn't pause his conversation. He simply reached out a hand and snapped his fingers twice, sharp reports that echoed in the room. A moment later, the door to the study opened and Grace entered, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the Persian rug. She moved to the silver tray to collect the empty cup and pot. Alastair, without looking away from his screen, held up a finger, stopping her. Gentlemen, you see? The help. You have to be constantly on top of them. Timeliness is the currency of success, and some are simply bankrupt. He finally swiveled his chair, fixing Grace with a look of profound disappointment. This was meant to be refreshed 10 minutes ago. I shouldn't have to signal for you. Anticipation. That's what separates the adequate from the exceptional. One of the faces on the screen, a man with a slicked back hair and a smug grin, chuckled. Can't get the staff, Alastair? Alastair gave a long-suffering sigh, playing to his audience. It's a universal truth, Richard. Competence is a rare commodity. Well, don't just stand there. The Ethiopian Yurgachev. And ensure it's at 89 degrees Celsius this time. Not 88. Not 90. 89. He turned his back on her, dismissing her from his world as abruptly as he had summoned her into it. Now, where were we? Yes, the quarterly dividends. Grace said nothing. Her expression, had he cared to look, was not one of shame or anger, but of a deep, unassailable calm. She collected the tray, her movements economical and precise, and retreated from the room, closing the door with a soft click that sealed his sanctum once more. The humiliation for Alastair was a performance. For Grace, it was a daily reality to be endured and set aside. Later, as he was preparing to leave for an important dinner, a fresh crisis erupted. He was in the grand entrance hall, slipping on his overcoat, when he patted his pockets for his prized Patek Philippe watch. It was missing. A cold spike of panic shot through him. That watch was a statement. It was history. It was worth a staggering amount of money. His mind, quick to assign blame, immediately landed on the only other person in the house. He stormed into the kitchen where Grace was polishing the already gleaming faucet. My watch, he demanded, his voice tight with accusation. The Patek Philippe. It was on my dresser. It's gone. Grace looked up, her hands stilling. I dusted the dresser, Mr. Finch. I did not see your watch. Don't lie to me, he snapped, his fear morphing into anger. It was there. You were the only one in there. Empty your pockets. No. And your bag. The command was brutal, stripping her of any dignity. He stood over her, arms crossed as she slowly, methodically, turned out the pockets of her plain apron. A lint roller, a spare key, a handkerchief. Nothing. Then she reached for her small, worn handbag on the counter. She unzipped it and began placing its contents before him. A wallet with a faded photograph of a young boy, a tube of lip balm, a bus pass, a small notebook, and a pencil. The sheer mundanity of her life, displayed under his suspicious gaze, was its own form of violence. Alistair stared at the pathetic array, his jaw clenched, searching for the glint of gold, the gleam of polished silver. There was nothing. Just the humble artifacts of a life he would never deign to understand. At that moment his eyes fell on the hall table just visible through the doorway. There, next to a folded newspaper, was the distinct shape of his watch. He must have placed it there himself when he brought in the mail and forgotten. The air went out of him. The righteous anger deflated, leaving only a hollow embarrassment. But Alistair Finch did not apologize. Apologies were admissions of error, and he was never in error. He cleared his throat, straightening his tie. "Well," he said, his tone dismissive, already rewriting the event in his mind. "It seems it was here all along. You really must be more careful about where you place my things when you're cleaning. It creates a frightful confusion." He walked over, snatched up the watch and fastened it on his wrist, a king reclaiming his crown. "I'm leaving. Ensure the doors are double-locked." And without another glance in her direction, he walked out into the night, leaving Grace standing in the kitchen, surrounded by the small, quiet evidence of her existence, the humiliation hanging in the air as palpable as the scent of the polish on her cloth. She took a slow, deep breath, gathered her things back into her bag and continued her work. The silence of the mansion settled back in, but now it was a heavy, oppressive thing filled with the echo of his unjust words. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind Alistair Finch, and the mansion seemed to let out a breath it had been holding for hours. The grand entrance hall, with its vaulted ceiling and cold marble floor, was plunged into a silence that was no longer opulent but profoundly empty. Grace Omondi stood for a moment in the kitchen, the echo of his accusation still ringing in the air, a bitter taste beneath her calm exterior. She methodically returned her few personal items to her bag, her movements slow and deliberate, a practiced ritual of reclaiming her space after his storm had passed. The watch, of course, had been on the hall table. She had seen it there herself when she'd polished the surface an hour before he'd even begun to get ready. But to point that out would have been to invite a greater storm, a more intricate web of blame. Her silence was a shield, forged in the furnace of countless such small injustices. Her work was not yet done. The study where he had held court and humiliated her before his peers, still needed its evening reset. She collected her cleaning caddy and pushed through the double doors. The room smelled of his expensive cigar and his even more expensive cologne, a masculine, imposing scent that seemed to cling to the leather books and heavy curtains. She worked with her usual quiet efficiency, wiping down the vast desk, realigning the blotter, ensuring every pen was perfectly parallel. Her eyes, however, were never still. They were constantly processing, noting, filing information away. This was her true nature, a mind that was a silent, relentless engine of observation. To Alistair Finch, she was moving a cloth over wood. In truth, she was absorbing the entire ecosystem of the room. It was this hyper-awareness that meant she heard the first sound that was out of place. It wasn't the groan of the house settling or the distant rush of the wind outside. It was the subtle, metallic scrape of a lock being tampered with at the side kitchen entrance, the one that led to the garden. Her hands stilled instantly. She didn't gasp or freeze in panic. Instead, she became even more still, her entire being focusing into a single point of listening. The scrape was followed by a soft, muffled click. The lock had yielded. Then the faintest creak of a hinge, carefully weighted to minimize sound. Footsteps. Not one set but several. Heavy, trying to be quiet but failing against the polished floors. Grace moved. Her actions were not those of a frightened woman, but of a strategist. She placed her cleaning cloth silently inside the caddy and closed its lid. She did not run or hide. She walked calmly out of the study and into the main hallway, positioning herself exactly where she would be seen as the intruders rounded the corner from the kitchen. It was a calculated risk. Surprise was a volatile element, better to control its detonation. 3 men dressed in dark clothing, their faces obscured by cheap ski masks, stopped short when they saw her. The lead one, taller and broader than the others, recovered quickly, raising a pistol that looked comically large and brutal in the refined surroundings. "Don't move a muscle. Don't scream," he growled, his voice low and rough. Grace didn't. She simply looked at them, her hands held loosely at her sides, her expression one of neutral observation. Her lack of reaction was more disconcerting to them than any scream would have been. The 2 others fanned out, nervously eyeing the expensive artifacts. "Where is he?" "The owner?" the leader demanded, stepping closer, the gun pointed at her chest. "He is out for the evening," Grace said, her voice level, almost conversational. It was not the voice he expected. There was no tremor, no plea. The man seemed thrown off balance for a second. "Tie her up," he barked at one of his companions. "In there." He gestured toward the kitchen with his gun. She offered no resistance as the youngest of the three, his hands shaking slightly, used a zip tie to secure her wrists to the back of a sturdy wooden chair. He couldn't meet her eyes. The leader paced, a caged animal in a museum. "The safe. He's got to have a safe. Where is it?" "It is in the study," Grace said calmly. "Behind the portrait of the hunting dogs." The leader stared at her, suspicion etched around the holes of his mask. "Why are you being so helpful?" "It is my job to be helpful," she replied, her answer so simple it was baffling. Just then, the distinct sound of a key turning in the front door lock echoed through the house. Alastair Finch had returned. He'd forgotten the documents for his dinner meeting, a fact that had put him in a fresh foul mood. He shoved the door open, muttering to himself about his own forgetfulness, and stopped dead. The scene before him was impossible. His maid tied to a chair, three masked men, one with a gun now pointed directly at him. Fear, pure and primal, washed over Alastair. His face went pale, his hands began to shake. The leader grabbed him by the arm, shoving him toward the study. The safe. Open it. Now." Alastair, his mind blank with terror, was pushed behind his own desk. He fumbled with the painting, swinging it aside to reveal the polished steel door of the safe. His fingers, slick with sweat, jabbed at the keypad. He couldn't think. The numbers swam before his eyes. He entered his birth date. He entered a random sequence. "I'm losing patience," the robber snarled, pressing the gun to Alastair's temple. The cold metal sent a jolt of pure horror through him. He was going to die. Here, in his study, over a pile of money he wouldn't be able to spend. From the hallway, Grace's voice cut through the tension, clear and precise as a bell. "The code is his daughter's birthday. October 12, 1012. The silence that followed was absolute. The robber at the safe, the gunman, even Alastair in his paralyzing fear, all turned their attention to the kitchen doorway. The leader slowly walked back out to her, his head cocked. "What did you say?" Grace met his gaze, her composure unbroken. "The code for the safe. It is the birthday of his daughter. 10-12-1012. The leader gestured to his man at the safe. The man input the numbers. There was a solid, satisfying clunk. The safe door swung open. The robbers stared, mesmerized by the stacks of cash, the velvet boxes holding jewelry, the gleaming bonds. They began stuffing everything into large duffel bags they had brought. The leader turned back to Grace, a strange mix of curiosity and confusion in his stance. "What? Why would you tell us that?" Grace's eyes shifted from the robber to Alastair, who was now slumped against the desk, weeping softly with relief and shock. She looked back at the masked man. "I am not scared of men who only want money," she said, her voice low but carrying immense weight. "I feel pity for a man who is scared of losing his." The answer was so profound, so utterly unexpected that the robber simply stared. She continued, her tone shifting to one of pure, logistical efficiency. "You should leave now. The back gate in the garden wall is unlocked. Your car is parked on Elm Street 2 blocks down. The street light there is broken. There are no cameras on that block." This final piece of information was the most shocking of all. It wasn't just help, it was a fully formed escape plan delivered by their captive. The robbers froze for a second, looking at each other. This was beyond their understanding. Without another word, the leader jerked his head toward the kitchen. They grabbed the overflowing bags and fled through the way they had come, disappearing into the darkness, following the precise instructions of the woman they had tied to a chair. Alastair Finch slid to the floor, his body trembling uncontrollably. The reality of what had just happened crashed down on him. He had been seconds from death. And he had been saved. Saved by the woman he had accused of theft hours before. The woman whose pockets he had demanded to empty. The woman who knew the code to his safe because she was observant, and who knew the robber's escape route because she was always watching. He crawled to the kitchen, his legs unable to support him, and with fumbling, shaking fingers, he undid the zip tie on Grace's wrists. He looked up at her, his eyes wide with a terror that was now being replaced by a dawning, staggering awe. "How?" he whispered, his voice ragged. "How did you know all of that?" Grace stood up, flexing her wrists gently. She looked down at the broken man on the floor before her. "I dust the portrait every day. I have seen the wear on the numbers 1012 on the keypad. His daughter's birthday card is on the mantelpiece every October. As for the men, she said, her voice returning to its practical, calm tone, I saw their car from the upstairs window while I was cleaning. An old, inconspicuous sedan. I watched where they parked it. I noticed the broken light. Panic gets people killed, Mr. Finch. The fastest way to make them leave was to give them what they wanted and show them the best way out. She spoke not with pride, but with the simple fact of someone explaining a completed task. The quiet, simple Maid was gone. In her place stood a master strategist, a person of unimaginable courage and intellect, and Alistair finally, truly, saw her for the first time. The aftermath of the robbery was not a single event, but a slow, dawning revelation that unfolded over hours, then days, within the walls of the Finch mansion and within the shattered ego of Alistair Finch himself. The initial chaos was predictable. The wail of police sirens pierced the night's silence, drawing neighbors to their windows with a morbid curiosity. The house was flooded with uniformed officers and detectives, their sharp, professional voices a stark contrast to the hushed tones usually reserved for these halls. Flashlights swept across manicured lawns, and evidence markers dotted the pristine interior like strange, invasive flowers. Through it all, two figures presented a study in opposites. Alistair Finch, usually the epitome of controlled authority, was a wreck. He sat on the very same chair Grace had been tied to, a wool blanket someone had draped over his shoulders doing little to stop his violent trembling. His story tumbled out in fragmented, hysterical bursts. He spoke of the gun, the terror, the certain feeling of his own mortality. But then his narrative would shift. His voice would drop, filled with a bewildered awe, and he would point to Grace, who stood quietly near the kitchen counter, sipping a glass of water someone had offered her. She knew, he would stammer to the stone-faced detective. She told them the code. She knew the code to my safe. And then she told them how to escape. She knew where their car was. The detective's eyes would narrow, initially viewing Grace with a fresh wave of suspicion. Was this an inside job? Was her calmness the cold calculation of a co-conspirator? But as they questioned her, her story never wavered. It was not a story of conspiracy, but one of breathtaking observation. She explained the worn numbers on the safe's keypad, a detail so small Alistair himself had never noticed it. She mentioned the birthday card on the mantel, a piece of the landscape of his own life he had long become blind to. And then she described, with the clarity of a military scout, the make, model and precise location of the robber's vehicle, the broken streetlight on Elm Street, the blind spot in the camera network his own expensive security firm had installed. She wasn't confessing, she was delivering a masterclass in awareness. The detective's suspicion melted into sheer, unadulterated astonishment. They had never heard a testimony like it. Alistair watched this transformation happen. He saw the looks on the officers' faces, the respect, the admiration they now directed at the woman he had treated as furniture. He heard one of them call her ma'am, with a tone of genuine deference. The reality of his own behavior over the years crashed down upon him with a weight far greater than any robber's gun. His pettiness, his arrogance, his cruel accusation over the watch, each memory was a fresh lash of shame. He had been the blind one, the foolish one, the man so entranced by his own reflection that he failed to see the profound depth of the person right in front of him. The story, as such stories do, escaped the confines of the mansion. A junior officer mentioned the incredible Maid to a reporter friend. The tale, perfect in its irony and drama, went viral. Headlines blared, "Millionaires Maid outsmarts robbers with genius IQ," and "Humble tycoon saved by woman he underestimated." The world was captivated. Grace Omondi, for a brief, shimmering moment, became a global symbol of quiet intelligence and dignity under pressure. Talk shows wanted her, book agents flooded the mansion's gate with offers. But Grace wanted none of it. The spotlight was a foreign and uncomfortable element. Her strength was in the shadows, in the quiet application of her mind, not in public spectacle. The true climax of the event occurred not under the glare of television lights, but in the quiet of the study the next morning. The police were gone. The reporters had been shooed away. The mansion was once again silent, but this time the silence was different. It was a waiting silence, a penitent one. Alistair had asked Grace to see him. He did not summon her. He asked. He was not seated behind his massive desk, the symbol of his power and separation. Instead, he stood in the center of the room and he had placed two armchairs opposite each other. When Grace entered, he gestured for her to take one. He remained standing, unable to yet meet her eye, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. "The police believe," he began, his voice hoarse from the night's emotions, "that the robbers would have likely killed me once I opened the safe. A loose end. They believe your intervention, your astonishing calm, is the only reason I am alive today. He finally turned to look at her, and his eyes were red-rimmed, stripped of all their usual arrogance. You saved my life, Grace. And all I have ever given you in return is condescension and disrespect. He took a ragged breath, the apology he had rehearsed a dozen times seeming utterly inadequate now that the moment was here. I have owed people money. I have owed people business favors. But I have never, in my entire life, owed a debt like the one I owe to you. And my greatest shame is that it took a gun to my head for me to see you. Truly see you. I judged you based on your job. I thought your silence was emptiness when it was, in fact, a deep and powerful intelligence I cannot even comprehend. I was a small, petty man in a large house. I am so profoundly sorry, Grace. There are no words sufficient to express my regret for how I have treated you. This was not the perfunctory, defensive apology of a man caught in a mistake. This was a full, gut-wrenching surrender of his ego. He didn't just say the words, he felt them and they cracked the very foundation of his identity. He then made his offer. It was not just a raise, though the figure he named was life-changing, enough to ensure her and her family's security for years to come. It was not just a new title, Director of Home Security and Management, a role crafted specifically to utilize her unique skills. It was the manner in which it was offered. He asked for her input on redesigning the security system. He offered to pay for any courses she might wish to take, any path she might want to pursue. He was for the first time not commanding but inviting. He was humbling himself before a superior mind and a superior character. Grace listened to it all, her hands folded in her lap, her expression one of quiet acceptance. She saw the genuine transformation in him, the shattered pride being reassembled into something new and better. She nodded slowly. Thank you, Mr. Finch, she said. I accept your apology. And your offer. There was no gloating, no victory in her tone. It was a peace treaty accepted. In the weeks that followed, Alastair Finch became a different man. He was quieter, more thoughtful. He spoke to all his staff with respect, learning their names, acknowledging their work. The story of the robbery and the miraculous Maid faded from the headlines, but its lesson was etched permanently into the heart of the millionaire. He had learned that true value is never measured in a bank account, but in the content of one's character. He learned that the quietest person in the room is often the one seeing the most. And he learned that sometimes, the most profound courage comes not from a place of power, but from a place of humble dignity. Grace Omondi continued her work, but now as a partner in the stewardship of the house, her incredible mind finally valued and put to use, a constant, quiet reminder that true strength needs no spotlight, and that the most important discoveries are often those we make about the people we have overlooked. If you've been captivated by this journey of humility and discovery, a story that reminds us to look beyond the surface and value the hidden strength in those around us, then you won't want to miss what we explore next. Our channel is dedicated to tales that unearth the profound lessons in everyday life, stories that challenge perceptions and inspire change. Subscribe now and join our community of thoughtful viewers. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to ensure you never miss a story that could change the way you see the world. Your next moment of inspiration is just a click away.